Hi everyone, we're back with our Startups in 60 Seconds series. I'm joined by Tom Berry, the COO and co-founder of Nutrition Technologies, for an in-depth interview. Tom, first of all, thank you very much for spending the time to rejoin us. It's been a pleasure the first time round. This time around, I wanted to go into a little bit more detail. And the first question I have for you is a little bit more on the origin story. So you mentioned in a tantalizing manner that you'd met your co-founder in Sierra Leone while you were touring the globe. So a bit of where the idea originated from and how you guys got together and formed a business would be great.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me back, Kartik. Always a pleasure. So yeah, I mean, Nutrition Technologies as a company was really was conceptualized by my business partner Nick Piggott when we were living in Sierra Leone in 2012. Both for us were working for the United Nations at the time, and we were really exposed to the kind of big global trends and actually, obviously, within Sierra Leone itself, the kind of the real issues around malnutrition, feed supply, food security. It was obviously really quite hot there, and the issues. And after a bit of unpicking, we recognized that the food security problem would not go away if actual feed ingredients weren't also solved. I mean, the people in Sierra Leone, when we were talking about, what do you want to eat? What do you want to be solved? 9 times out of 10, they actually all came back to us and said, we want to eat meat. And we did more market research and dug a bit deeper. That was the problem all over the developing world. And that's what the trends were predicting as well. So, we looked into this issue and it came down to basically the production of protein. I mean, it's very easy to produce the carbohydrates, the cereals, the crops. I mean, yes, there's deforestation involved and other really bad environmental issues, but the key problem for the animal feed companies is the protein. That's the expensive part. And really, the kind of predominant traditional products in the market are fish meal and soybean meal. And majority of animals, particularly carnivorous animals and fish, they need the fish meal because the amino acids in the soybean meal aren't kind of, there's not enough of them to support the growth of these species. So, and fish meal is the thing that's really in short supply, as I mentioned in the previous interview. So, I mean, Nick and I were looking at different solutions, and the concept of insect protein was kind of new, written down, but no one was doing it. And it really took us back then as something that could really change the world. It's like breeding fly larvae en masse, like it just seemed a bit crazy. And it really took us. The concept of being able to do it also on land anywhere, somewhere like Sierra Leone would have been fantastic. The ability to take food waste, use the larvae, then produce a really good quality feed for them to raise chickens. I mean, unfortunately, then the business element comes into place. With all that in mind, we looked at the world on a white sheet of paper and said, where's the best place to breed these tropical flies? It's got enough of the raw material, enough support for the kind of logistics and other things you need to do to start a business. And we actually landed in Vietnam. The growth of aquaculture trends in Vietnam were amazing, and Southeast Asia as a whole. So in early 2015, Nick moved over to Vietnam and pioneered the very first insectary breeding system we had, and then I joined a few months later with family in tow. And it started off very, very basic in Vietnam with a partnership with a local agricultural university, and spent the weekend in the jungles with little traps, catching our first black soldier flies, building little insectary cages to breed them. And the founding team was very hardworking and very small. I mean, it was myself, Nick, our kind of now CTO scientist, a guy called Martin, who absolutely loves flies and insects as a whole and knows a lot about them as well as very keen Vietnamese interns who are now full-time employees of us today and have been with us through the whole journey.
Amazing. How on earth did you convince your family, on a personal point, to ship off to Vietnam?
Well, I was quite lucky in terms of my wife works she used to work, she works at DFID, now the part of the Foreign Office and Development. So she's quite used to living overseas. So actually,
Nice.
Vietnam was quite a step up from Sierra Leone and then Ethiopia, where we were living before. So she was quite happy.
Fair enough. Understood. Right. Okay. So the founding team, as I understood it, were mostly assembled between the co-founders and plus whomever you had recruited locally in Vietnam. What kind of team size are you at now?
So now we've got 110 people. Now in early 2018, we actually moved from Vietnam to Malaysia. We hit a real challenge, which was the legal system in Vietnam. The concept of doing insect breeding was not written into their system, and the ability to get the licenses to do it was a complete roadblock for us. So again, we looked at everything on a white sheet of paper, knowing what we had known after breeding flies for a year and a half, and landed in the best place to do it that we thought was in Johor Bahru in Malaysia, right down in the south. It has all the raw materials. It's the perfect tropical climate for breeding the flies, and also enough of a talent pool as well. So we all up sticks and moved over to Malaysia.
Got it. Understood. Actually, on that point, it's probably a good time to understand how the supply chain works. So if you had shifted away from Vietnam to Malaysia, was that a big issue for you to kind of start fresh in the supply chain? I presume you supply into a certain radius or the local fisheries, aquaculture, and other kind of breeding areas.
I know. So I mean, our products. We create 3 products, and this is the beauty of the whole system. I mean, the fly larvae eat the food waste, and then we turn the fly larvae into protein and oil, and then at the same time, they also produce. From that food process, they produce another product called frass, which is actually a fancy word for insect poo, and the frass is a fantastic organic fertilizer. And so actually there's a zero waste system. Everything that comes in gets sold, and we export all the protein, and then we sell domestically all the frass. So the protein and the oil get exported and to similar customers we were speaking with back in Vietnam. But yes, we did have to initiate and go out and speak to all the plantation managers in Malaysia and find new buyers for the frass.
Got it. Okay. And then in terms of which aspects of your supply chain you're depending on, I mean, from what I understood in the previous discussion, you only have 2 inputs, which is the flies and I guess some land in order to accommodate them and run your processes. Is that right? Or is there anything else?
Yeah, I mean, it boils down to 2 inputs. I mean, it's the food waste itself, which is our raw materials,
Of course,
and
the
then
food waste, yep.
fly eggs, which we breed ourselves. So realistically, our raw materials is just food waste. That's the only thing that comes into the factory. And we chose Johor Bahru because it has a lot of food processing plants in that area. It supports, Johor itself is a large agricultural state. All the fruits and vegetables then come into Johor Bahru, which they get processed. And then we often take the waste from that food waste processing factories predominantly, as well as some directly from the farms itself. And that's the real key.
You alluded to the idea that fish meal was your kind of greatest incumbent competitor or competing raw material that's going into the agricultural process. Could you talk a little bit more about that? What's the kind of ROI that they're getting by switching to your insect-based product?
I mean, over time, it will be cost. I mean, we once we've got the economies of scale of the insect production up to where we know we can get them, they would be saving around 20% per ton
Wow.
on the fish meal cost. So they're really interested in it for that. I mean, not only that, as the world grows and the population continues to grow, the demand of food is growing, but the fish meal supply is finite. So the feed manufacturers and who are our clients, they're very aware of the new protein on the block, and they're wanting to buy it now, so they understand it. They can get it into their feed pellets, which they then sell to the farms. They don't want to miss out on what's going to be in main supply in 5 years' time.
In terms of the contracting process, the business model, so do you have to sign long-term agreements with each of the companies that you're serving your product to? Is it an RFP process? How do the dynamics of the demand side work?
Yeah, it's very B2B. So we kind of look to secure kind of 2-year plus contracts, supply contracts with our partners, with our clients.
On the product side, I wanted to ask two questions about the future. So number one was, out of curiosity, can the same product be used on a B2C basis? So I don't know if it requires sterilization or some further treatment and just powdering it as a protein source for humans to consume directly. And secondly, you mentioned that you had 3 varieties of product at present. Could you diversify into other types of insects or other types of products? What's really the vision for the future?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so the B2C question is I think theoretically possible. From our sake as a business and a strategy, it's not a strategy we believe the world is ready for yet. I mean, I think at the kind of heart of our kind of company kind of vision and mission is the belief that insects are a natural part of the feed chain. Therefore, animals like chickens and fish are used to eating them. So when we provide those proteins in a controlled farmed environment, it's actually, we're just repeating a natural thing. I think the ick factor, as people say, for humans eating insects, will diminish over time, but I think they'll focus on insects like crickets, not fly larvae. I think you can get more disgusting than fly larvae, and I'm not too sure humans will adopt to that quite quickly. So it's not a strategy we're pursuing. I mean, in terms of us growing and other insects, for sure, but I mean, the R&D technology learning process is long. To do this kind of farming at a large commercial scale, you have to understand so much about the animal, so many sensitivities and different growth stages, and it's never been done before. You're not getting hordes of graduates pumped out of universities who understands this new animal and how to breed it. It's a long learning curve. So yeah, it's long term. We would look into diversifying insects to satisfy our kind of overall mission. But yeah, probably not for quite a few years. I think we're focused more on developing and refining our current product to satisfy our customers' demands. I mean, our protein can get refined even further into peptides, which should then have a more specific use in the feed industry. Equally, our oil product, it's not just an animal feed product. It can also be used in cosmetics and as a biofuel as well. I mean, we have got a partner who's already starting to put it into a beauty product.
Amazing. Got it. And on the topic of R&D, actually, so you had previously leveraged your relationship with an aquaculture university that was based in Vietnam. Had they actually advanced to a degree where you can pluck certain concepts and theories from them and then put it into practice? Did you actually depend on your own internal R&D to get to the point at which you are?
No, yeah, it was fully all our own R&D. I mean, they liked the concept of what we were doing, and we got quite a lot of support from the faculty in terms of providing us some space and some interns. But they had nothing on the R&D front. We had to teach ourselves from scratch, and that's actually how the kind of company has developed over time, and how we've ended up quite different from our competitors, actually, because the faculty that we were partnered with at the beginning was also the faculty of microbiology. So whenever we encompassed issues or problems in the process line as we scaled, we always looked to the biology for a solution rather than engineering, which is a lot of what our competitors did over in Europe. When the fact that flies after a few days had a tendency in the beginning that the feed would start rotting, and then all the flies would die. So the solution was then to feed them frequently and often rather than in one go. The engineers were then busily trying to figure out a highly automated IoT system to be able to regulate trays being fed every few days. Whereas we looked into how we actually preserve that feed through proper fermentation and control the microbiology environment.
Got it. I think we've actually touched on the subject from multiple angles now across 2 interviews, but you did mention previously in our conversation that it's kind of a mix of vertical farming and a traditional production process. So could we walk through the production process very quickly?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it is farming because we're growing insects, but it's done in a very controlled, very manufacturing style way. So when our food waste comes in, it gets emptied into kind of pits, which then go through a series of conveyors and machines, which break it down into its component parts. It then gets mixed together and fermented and turned into like a kind of feed for the insect, and then piped into another warehouse, and then put automatically dosed into trays, which then get stacked up and then fed into a warehouse where the larvae then grow in this very vertical farmed system, not using very much space at all for the output. And then the larvae bioconvert that food waste, and then they need to then be separated from the frass, which I mentioned earlier, and then cleaned, sterilized, dried, and then we have to extract their proteins in a high quality kind of processing building next door.
In terms of the extent of the ambition, so is Southeast Asia the geography for you? Does it make sense for you to kind of plan on a 10 to 15 year mission to fully map the area, the region, or is there a greater ambition to move to the West as well?
I mean, definitely Southeast Asia is on our agenda for the next 5 to 10 years. We've designed our system to complement the tropical environment. We have managed to keep our costs really low because we do not need to build artificial humidification systems or kind of light systems. We captivate the local environment. So we will look to replicate our current model around Southeast Asia as quickly as possible. And then we will start focusing on other tropical areas. I don't think we would look to come into Europe or places like that, because I said our overall end mission is to replace fish meal. And to do that, we need to keep the costs really low.
Understood. Very good. And my final question for you is one I ask every entrepreneur. Could you tell us an interesting anecdote, possibly even a funny one, or a challenge that you'd have to overcome in founding the business or scaling the business to the current extent that it is now?
I mean, I think our most challenging time actually came in that switch when we moved over from Vietnam to Malaysia. The kind of 6 of us, myself, my co-founding partner, and the staff we had at the time. And we did have a small lab set up in Vietnam in which we were getting it shipped over. But, we really needed to keep our colony alive. We were breeding our own flies, and, they need kind of attending to every day. So we had to have a very slick, people hiding little eggs and patches of neonates in their belongings as we flew over from Vietnam to Malaysia. And we went to a lot of effort to get our colony there. And then the pilot factory that we had at the time, we didn't have any equipment, but we needed to breed these flies. And we were basically having to take anything we could find, kind of empty cups, kind of plastic containers we ripped out to make makeshift trays before our equipment arrived.
Oh, wow.
We didn't have any suppliers or feed, so we ended up, going to the supermarket and buying the food, and it was just ridiculous. Like, we are spoiling these flies here just to keep this colony alive. Then our equipment arrived, and we started getting the new suppliers on board who are actual food waste, rather than giving them steak and foie gras.
That is absolutely fascinating. Gosh, it's been a real pleasure and very, very interesting to understand how this new cutting edge innovation is possibly going to reshape our global food supply chain. Tom Berry, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Kartik.